I've been looking through League Start recommendations, and to be honest, some of them are pretty sus. I mean, who would take this guy seriously? Sorting through good guides and bad guides can often be harder than writing a guide for yourself. I can't cover all of the pitfalls on a League Start build or League Start guide that's done wrong. But before I get into the rest of the video, I do want to cover a few rules of thumb that can hopefully help guide you towards good builds and away from bad builds. One of the first major red flags is any build that goes out of its way to emphasize its DPS, especially numbers that are very unrealistic. For example, 40 million DPS, 100 million DPS. This starter will one-shot Shaper. These are all things that people shouldn't be promising, because you won't be able to deliver them in realistic gear. You can say, oh, well, I'm playing with a team, and I'll be a fully set up Aura Stacker by day 2, and that's awesome for you. The problem is, most people won't be able to set up an Aura Stacker by day 2. Most people are not going to have the gear that goes along with dealing tens or hundreds of millions of DPS. And worse, most of these builds heavily compromise their defenses because they're using their damage as a selling point. I know people like to joke, 6 portals are my defenses, but you lose a lot more time than you'd expect every time you die. Remember, it's a loading screen, and even with a solid state, that can take a while. On top of this, you're losing experience, and less passives means it takes you longer to kill things. Taking longer to kill things means your defenses are even more important, so then you die again because you weren't leveled up, which causes you to lose more EXP, and the vicious cycle continues, usually ending when someone rerolls. Now, I won't say that all of the following are a guarantee of inflated DPS, but some warning signs can include talking about the total damage dealt by an Ignite, not its DPS, because an Ignite can deal 10 million damage over 7 seconds and not be much over a mil DPS. Another example is throwing out more traps or mines than the build is capable of having down at a given time. Or if we're talking about Explosive Arrow or Penance Brand, adding more stacks than the build has attack or cast speed to actually inflict on an enemy. Another example is talking about how much poison damage, not total DPS, but damage a build does, or heavily relying on temporary buffs. If your flasks are only up 10% of the time, but you get 80% of your DPS when they are up, then you don't really have that much DPS. You have about 1/5 of that DPS. I've also seen some very tricky things when it comes to Berserk. I will see builds that use Warlord's Mark in the build, and use it for rage generation, but have it inactive, and instead activate Assassin's Mark. However, they leave Berserk on. This is very deceptive, because you're not going to have Assassin's Mark on the enemy, and also Berserk active, if Warlord's Mark is your only source of rage. Finally, builds to be a little bit careful of are builds with cooldowns. PoB does not always accurately take the cooldown into account. For example, when it comes to General's Cry, it often reports far more DPS than the skill actually does, because it's not properly factoring in the Warcry's cooldown. Now, another problem can be found when builds overly focus on price. Things like, you can kill the Feared for 20C. Most of the time, these claims are wildly exaggerated at best, totally inaccurate at worst. A good League starter should be solo self-found viable, or at least very close to it. It doesn't really matter if it can do X or Y piece of content on an arbitrary budget, because prices are changing all the time. Even something as simple as a level 20 gem could cost you more than 20C on League start, but late in the League it will be 2C. So when someone makes the build late in the League, they're using late League prices, not League start prices, and if they're selling a build based on budget, not based on strength, you might find that its shortcomings are a bit too steep for you, and things are far more expensive than you expected them to be. Instead, try to look for people who talk about how to get the items, rather than people who tell you how cheap they are. After all, I can say this item's cheap all day, and it won't really help you obtain it. On the other hand, I could say, if you want to afford this item, you can use Heist and Chaos Recipe to get it. Or I could say, this build uses a Chevron's wrappings, and you can farm the offering card by killing Chevron bosses. You'll be able to get it that way, even if you're in solo self-found. These are examples of ways in which good guides will teach you how to get the items, and bad guides will just flash numbers in your face, hoping you aren't paying attention. Finally, beware of outdated guides. Several times now, I've seen people say, oh, Seismic Trap is just as good as in 3.16. Now, this may very well be the case. We haven't seen the changes to the AoE radius in-game. However, it could also be that the skill is losing 60 to 80% of its damage, in which case it wouldn't be at all similar to 3.16, and in fact, it would not be a very good choice. So whenever someone says something works exactly like it used to, despite the skill getting changes in the patch notes, take that with a mountain of salt and make sure you have a very good backup plan. Also, beware of videos that are 6 or 9 months old and say 3.17 ready, unless they detail some changes, or at the very least, what is and isn't changing based on the patch notes. I think a lot of the builds that were good in 3.16 will be good in 3.17 this time, but that's usually not the case, so take it with a grain of salt. Now, I know this has gotten a little long because I wanted to talk about some of the ways in which bad build guides are problematic and red flags to look out for when picking your league starter. The following are 4 build guides from content creators that I trust. These are things that I feel safe recommending to you as league starters and I would feel safe using myself. After that, there's a short section where I talk about 2 more videos, which I think you should also take a look at. All of the videos and all of the content creators will be linked down in the description. If you find any of them interesting, then please be sure to check out their channel and watch their video for yourself, as that'll give a lot more information than me talking about it for a couple minutes. So I have to start with a confession. I don't normally play minions. As a result, it's one of the big holes in my knowledge when it comes to Path of Exile. So I rarely talk about minion builds. But today, we're starting with Absolution Necromancer as showcased by Epic Builds. You can kind of think of this as Dominating Blow but ranged. Remember, Dominating Blow has been a minion staple for a long time. It's quite often one of the best tanky minion builds that can be used for bossing. Absolution is Dom Blow, but ranged and not a strike skill. Which means if you want to start Siege with some bossing, but you don't want to have to worry about getting into melee, you can feel safe in Absolution. When it first released, this skill was the biggest bait since Crackling Lance, but since then, it's got multiple damage and quality of life improvements that makes it quite good. This version specifically has been played and tested by multiple people I trust, and it shows you don't need a Doriani's prototype to play the skill. If you enjoy minions, I suggest starting Absolution Necromancer. Now, Absolution Necro can absolutely be scaled all the way into the endgame, but if you want to play something that's a little different, maybe a little bit more power for your investment, you could instead go with BalorMage's Skeleton Mage Necromancer. This is so similar to Absolution that you could start as Absolution and easily transition into this later. But it is reliant on getting one specific jewel that might be difficult to track down in SSF or a little bit expensive in Trade League. Much like how Absolution is Dom Blow but ranged, Skelly Mages are Skelly Warriors but ranged, and hyper-aggressive. You can kind of think of them as super aggressive totems that will blast everything on the screen, and then once everything on the screen is blasted, they'll start blasting everything off the screen. It might take a little bit to get this up and running, but once you do, it's one of the most cost-effective choices for content like simulacrum farming. It should be a good way to deal with the new bosses, and you can be rest assured that you will be able to take some hits if you're playing this build. It is a Necromancer after all, and Necromancers are pretty tanky unless they use Necro Aegis. Then they're just a non-Cromancer. If that joke didn't make sense to you, don't worry, it didn't make sense to me either, but I'm leaving it in. Now, on the other hand, if you're more of a sort of person who prefers to do something themselves, then I suggest ShakCentral's Cold Dot for Everyone. This build has undergone radical changes from previous incarnations. It's far tankier, and it's using better defensive mechanics than before, similar to what I showcased in my Cast on Crit Forbidden Right build. This build also maps much more quickly due to the clear speed added by switching to Wintertide Brand as a primary skill. On top of all of this, ShakCentral has really gone above and beyond to add as much information as is humanly possible. So if you're a new player looking for your first build, or something that you feel safe recommending to a friend, if this is your first experience in Path of Exile, you're a veteran, you play in solo self-found, or love trading and min-maxing, I'm happy to recommend ShakCentral's Cold Dot for Everyone. In fact, I would like to present this build with the Golden Enki Award for Build Guide Excellence. It's a strong league starter that you can use for bossing, delving, and much more. If you want further proof that this is good for bossing, just go take a look at the character that Dan played, yes that's right, Uber Dan, in Hardcore as his bossing and delver in 3.16 Scourge League. It was in fact a very similar Cold Dot build, and if that isn't proof that Cold Dot can truly do everything, I'm not really sure what is. But maybe Cold Dot really isn't your thing. After all, it's winter out, and maybe you want something a little bit hotter? We don't have any hot new skills, but if you like things hot, then I would suggest Pohx's Righteous Fire Inquisitor. I expect RF to get a lot of value out of the new influences. After all, we've already seen dot multi, and as things get teased, they seem to be more and more valuable. If you're going to be playing RF, well, Pohx has probably forgotten more about the skill than most people know to begin with. This build has been proven over and over again in Hardcore, Softcore, Gauntlet, and more. It's probably a little more clear-focused than a lot of the other builds on this list, however, it provides you with the defenses that you need to still be able to tackle bosses, along with having high recovery for that nice comfy burn. So I recommend Pohx's RF Inquisitor as a League start build because it'll make your hair 10 times more awesome. Now, if you found any of these builds to be helpful, again, please do check out the original creator. But if you want to see more content like this from me, then leave a like on the video, sub to the channel, ring the bell, and let me know down in the comments below what sort of builds you might like to see me showcase in the future. If you want to talk about more builds or hang out with an awesome community, then my Discord is also down in the description, and is one of the best places to go if you have questions about builds. So now, I have a couple of extras. First, something that isn't really a build, but it's a video that I wanted to highlight anyway. It is a Duelist Leveling guide by Altec2k. This is a great way to level Duelist, and while personally I don't enjoy the leveling process and I never bother to do it in an efficient manner, I just kind of click damage and upgrade my items until I reach maps. If you're looking to become more efficient, spend less time leveling and more time mapping, this is a great resource to help. He does a very good job of breaking down the process and explaining his reasoning. Especially before level 28, a solid plan like this will go a long way, regardless of what you plan to play in the endgame. And even if you don't plan to play this exact setup later, or even if you don't plan to play something too similar, you'll have plenty of regrets from your quests that you can use to respec the nodes. And finally, one more build that I want to kind of give as an honorable mention. This is something that I came across and does a good job to incorporate a lot of things that people are talking about right now. There are some aspects that need a little bit more work, but I still wanted to recommend it as it's different from a lot of what I've seen played and makes for a very good starting point. If you're looking to start LE Spectral Helix in trade, there's a lot of good concepts here. Using White Wind is a very good way to scale your damage from almost nothing. However, I'd also adapt this recommendation a bit. Mainly, he mentions that he's hesitant to drop his shield because the build's a little bit lacking on life and resists without the shield. My solution to this would be to drop the Hrim Sorrow. They're honestly not providing all that much value, especially since you could get a pair of gloves with 35% cold conversion, which do most of what these do, while also potentially giving you more life, more resists, or even attack speed. You lose out on a bit of block, but you gain quite a bit more damage and easier access to spell suppression. The loss of life should be offset by the gloves. One other thing that I wanted to mention, in terms of Spectral Helix, for an endgame helmet, consider the Fledgling. This will give your Spectral Helix far shot, and it does make for a very well-rounded endgame item, and it's often quite inexpensive. Remember, if you use Nightblade, and if you're using Wither on left click, you may not get the optimal elusive effect. But a slightly unoptimal elusive effect that you have up all the time is certainly better than actively using Withering Step but forgetting to cast it so you never get the benefit. I'll reattach a POB with some of my recommendations, but overall I like the core setup that TelvanniPoE has, and I like the Forge of a Phoenix run. So those are the 4 builds from other content creators that I recommend for Path of Exile, 317, Siege of the Atlas, and Archnemesis League, along with 2 additional resources that I thought you might find helpful or interesting. So only one question remains. What will I be playing at League start? And I still haven't made up my mind yet. I guess you might just have to tune into my stream on Friday, because I probably won't decide until the very last minute. Hopefully you've had an easier time deciding your League start than I have with mine. Thank you for watching, and again, a special thanks to my patrons and YouTube channel members. If you want to support me, you can do so by clicking the links down in the description below, or on screen right now. You can also support by making purchases through my Nexus page. Or if you just want to chill and hang out, be sure to join the Discord. Again, links for everything are down in the description below. Thank you, and have a great day.